Hi. For my video wine midterm, I'll be reviewing the menu from Le Farfalle Charleston, which is an Italian-based osteria which focuses on classic Italian fare with modern spins. So beginning with the appetizers, we'll start with the polpette alla Sicilian, which are pork meatballs, which are topped with a tomato sugo, which is a tomato sauce, and they have currants and pine nuts. So for my first pairing, I would go with a Chianti Classico Reserva 2015 from the Bulgaroni family vineyards in Toscana. So it's got high acidity characteristic of Italian wines, and it'll balance with the acidity of the tomato sauce, and the high tannin content will contrast with the rich fattiness of the meatballs. And the black fruit-forward flavor profile will complement nicely with the currants that garnish the meatballs. The next wine I would pair with the polpette is a Barolo from Barbera d'Alba 2017. And this is a medium-bodied red wine with a lighter tannin presence to let the flavor of the pork shine through. The sharp acidity of the wine will marry with the acidity of the sauce, and it'll be a really nice pairing. The next appetizer on the menu is the octopus carpaccio, which is braised octopus which has been thinly sliced, and it is served with pickled eggplant and roasted tomato, and a slice of fatunta, which is sesame bread that's been rubbed with garlic. And for this, I would choose a wine with bright acidity, such as the Sauvignon Blanc from De Pinti Trevinzi, the 2019 vintage. So the bright acidity will highlight the acidity of the lemon and the pickled zucchini. And while the fruit flavors of citrus and apple will pair nicely with the delicate octopus flesh, and the medium body of the wine won't serve to overpower the delicate flavors of the octopus. I would also do a medium-bodied Gamay, specifically the 2020 vintage from Domaine de la Prebenda, which is from Beaujolais, France. This light tannin structure will allow the delicate octopus to shine through, while the fruity acidity of the Gamay will mingle with the roasted tomatoes and cut through the fat of the buttered fatunta. The next appetizer on the list is the ceci in Amudo, which is a take on hummus that is made with Umbrian-style stewed chickpeas, and this appetizer also features preserved lemon and Aleppo pepper. And so for this, I would recommend a Chardonnay, specifically the 2019 Hayes Valley Chardonnay from Central Coast, California. This buttery Chardonnay will cut through the acid of the lemon and the heat presented by the Aleppo pepper, while the medium-bodied citrus fruit presence will lighten up the oil content of the chickpea dish. I would also go with the orange wine Pithos from Grecanico, which is from Sicilia, Italy. The body and the bold, full-bodied nature of the wine will pair with the Mediterranean spices present in the dish, such as the Aleppo pepper and preserved lemon, and the waxy mouthfeel of this wine will be assuaged by the creamy and fatty nature of the dish. So the next appetizer on the list is the warm rosemary focaccia, which is a house-made focaccia, and it is served with flaky Maldon sea salt and crispy rosemary, and then it has accompanying sauces, which are our whipped ricotta, the tomato sauce, and extra virgin olive oil. For this dish, I would go with the Lambrusco, specifically the Lini 910 Rosé from Lambrusca Emilia-Romagna. This light-bodied sparkling wine provides a nice freshness to the salt and savoriness of the focaccia, which is brightened by the juicy minerality of the wine. The berry flavors of the wine provide a nice contrast to the rosemary and whipped ricotta, while the acidity of the wine complements the acidity of the tomato sauce, which also accompanies the focaccia. I would also go with a Pinot Noir, specifically the 2020 vintage Pinot Noir from Orchard Lane, which is from Marlborough, New Zealand. So, differing from a white wine pairing, this Pinot Noir will create an experience similar to jam and toast, and the hearty focaccia will soak up the notes of strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries that are present in the Pinot Noir. The earthiness presented by the wine will complement the herbaceous nature of the focaccia and elevate the creamy whipped ricotta. The next appetizer on the list is the roasted delicata squash, and delicata squash is a squash similar to butternut, and in the preparation it has been roasted in a blast oven, and then it is plated with a fresh pumpkin seed pesto, a Rogliano cream, and also pomegranate molasses. So for this, I would go with a Syrah, specifically the Love and Grapes 2019 from the Rhone Valley. The roasted sweetness brought forth by the squash calls for a drier wine to balance out the flavors of the squash, while the pomegranate molasses requires a pronounced acidity to quell the funky acidity which it entails. The flavors of black fruit and peppercorns will pair nicely with the dish in its entirety, while the tannin structure of the wine will cut through the richness of the Rogliano. I would also choose a Zinfandel, specifically the 2017 vintage from Dave Vineyards in Sonoma County. This rich and intense wine will pair nicely with the complex flavors of squash and pomegranate molasses, balancing out the sweetness of the squash and the acidity of the molasses. And this full-bodied wine will add depth to the pumpkin seed pesto while cutting through the richness of the fats presented in the pesto and the Rogliano. For the next appetizer, we have the Italian wedding soup, which is a soup based off of an entire hogshead, which has been braised and slowly reduced, which creates the liquid portion of the soup. And then that meat is distributed throughout the soup, as well as some of the meat from our meatballs, which has been crumbled into the soup. It comes with Tuscan kale and farfalle noodles, which are little bow tie noodles, and it also has Parmesan cheese grated on top. So for this soup, I would go with the Chianti Classico Reserva from the Bulgaroni family vineyards again. With the aromas of black cherry and dried herbs, and also a hint of leather, this medium-bodied Chianti will match the depth of flavor of the slow-cooked pork head and all the fats and gelatin which create the robust soup. The balanced acidity of the wine will pair nicely with the bitterness of the Tuscan kale, while light tannins will while the light tannins will balance out the robustness and the richness of the dish. I would also go with Grenache Syrah, specifically the 2017 Clos de la Tour des Papas from Châteauneuf-du-Pape, France. The richness of the pork and broth will be complemented by the full-bodied red bend of Clos de la Tour des Papas. The intense black fruit flavors and the gentle spice and smokiness that comes through will meld with the flavors of the braised pork while bringing a touch of sweetness to the bitter kale. So the final appetizer offered at Le Farfalle is the whipped ricotta, which is our staple appetizer, and it is ricotta that has had its moisture drained from it, and it's whipped up with some olive oil to create a really creamy spreadable dip, and it is topped with more extra virgin olive oil, honey, and freshly cracked black pepper. So for this, I would go with Riesling, specifically the 2018 Cabinet Riesling from Schlossgut DL, which is in Germany. This lush and round Riesling will pair really nicely with the creamy sweet ricotta, as the sweetness of the Riesling will allow for the flavor profile of the dish to shine through. And the refreshing acidity of the wine, paired with the notes of dried pineapple and eucalyptus, will help to lighten up the heavy fat presence brought forth by the ricotta. I would also go with a Pinot Grigio, specifically the Antonucci Friuli Pinot Grigio, which is considered a slight rosé. So the crisp and dryness of the rosé will cut through the fat in the dish and highlight the sweetness of the honey and the spice of the black pepper, and the minerality present will pair nicely with the aromatic nature of the fresh cracked black pepper. So moving on to the entrees, our first offering is the linguine, which is a linguine with clams, and these clams have been braised in white wine, butter, garlic, and some lemon juice. And once they've opened up, they're added to a linguine pasta, and they're all stirred together with some extra olive oil and some Parmesan and Pecorino cheese. And so for this, I would go with a Prosecco, specifically the Cuvée Beatrice from Friuli Venezia Giulia, Italy. It's a really nice and refreshing Prosecco, and the fresh and youthful sparkling wine will accompany the fresh seafood taste of the clams, while the acidity will really help to balance out the rich sauce and the hearty linguine in the dish. Another wine that I would go with is another Pinot Grigio, this one from Il Conte Veneto, Italy. It's the 2020 vintage, and it's really crisp and dry, and it'll provide a nice acidity to brighten up the buttery sauce, while the lack of tannins and bold flavors will allow the freshness and salinity of the clams to shine through and not get really muddled with any bold, intense flavors. The next entree on the menu is the fusilli lunghi, which is basically a classic take on cacio e pepe. So it's going to be really thick, spiraled fusilli noodles, and they are cooked with butter, pasta water, and pecorino romano cheese to create a really thick emulsified sauce. And they also feature a lot of fresh cracked black pepper, so you're getting a really creamy, peppery sauce with a really thick, hearty noodle. And for this, I would once again choose the Chianti Classico Reserva from the Bulgaroni family vineyards, the 2015 vintage, because the medium-bodied Chianti will be able to take on the power of the fresh cracked black pepper, and the delicate fruit-forward flavors will provide a nice lightness to the heavy and rich sauce. I would also go with a Malbec, specifically from the Alto Cedro Uco Valley, the 2020 vintage. So the silky tannin presence will help to assuage some of the richness from the cheese and butter-based sauce, while the notes of spice, specifically of black pepper, will complement the pepper that is distributed throughout the pasta. The next entree on the menu is the spaghetti alla puttanesca, which is a tomato-based sauce that has some really bold flavors of garlic, anchovies, capers, and olives. And so, due to the bold flavors of the olives, capers, and anchovies, I would go with a lighter-bodied red wine, such as the Nero de Avola, specifically the 2020 vintage from Nero del Lupe, Sicily. The warm and fruit-forward wine from southern Italy will not be too intense to overshadow the complexities of the dish, but will instead emphasize these flavors with a refreshing acid presence. I would also go with a Negro Amaro, specifically the Salice Salentino from Cantina Vecchiotura, which is from Puglia, and it is a 2016 vintage. And this fuller-bodied red wine has a middling sweetness and acidity, which will not overpower the strong flavors of the dish. Alongside a smooth tannin presence, it would be a great wine if you're craving a bold, full-bodied red, but wish to still experience the purity of flavor from the dish without any distractions. The next entree on the menu is the rigatoni verde, which is a slow-cooked pork ragu sauce, which is used to cover rigatoni verde noodles, which get their name rigatoni verde from spinach powder, which is added to the noodles. I would first pair the Brunello de Montalcino, the 2016 from Armiglia Toscana. This full-bodied savory red wine has pronounced black fruits and a creamy tannin structure, which will be able to stand up to the rich meatiness of the pork ragu. And the acidity of the wine will be balanced with the acidity of the tomatoes, while also elevating the vegetal nature of the spinach noodles. I would also pair Pinot Noir, specifically the Sass Pinot Noir from 2018, which is from Wilmette Valley, Oregon, and it is an unfiltered wine. So this Sass Pinot Noir is a wine that offers complexity to parallel the complex flavors of slow-cooked pork and roasted tomatoes, and the notes of pepper and earthiness which come forth in the wine alongside the mature tannins will complement the richness of the dish with a long finish. Next, we have the bucatini alla norma, which is a tomato-based pasta which has chili and ricotta salata, which is a firm goat's cheese. And it is also served with fried eggplant chips. So for this, I would also use the Lambrusco, specifically the Lini 910 Rosé from Emilia-Romagna, Italy. The light-bodied effervescent wine will pair nicely with the heat of the chili in the dish, and its crisp acidity will also stand up to the acidity of the bright tomato sauce that brings the dish together. The refreshing fruitiness of the wine will brighten up the cheese and the fried eggplant to create a well-rounded dining experience. And I would also pair it with a 2018 Pecorino from Bordonnaise Abruzzo. This Pecorino features bright and intense notes of stone fruit and pear, which will add some nice acidity and freshness to the acidity of the tomato sauce. The tangy undercurrent of lime zest, which comes through in the note, paired with its light body, will work to complement the heat of the dish and will not overpower the delicate flavor of the ricotta salata cheese. The next dish we have is the agnolotti, which is one of the most popular entrees at Le Farfalle. It is a duck confit stuffed ravioli, which also has some whipped ricotta inside, and it is covered in a veal demi-glace sauce. So it's pretty bold in its flavor, And I would pair this with a Barolo, specifically the Bisou 2015 from Bonfante and Charlie, which is from the Piedmont region in Italy. This full-bodied Italian Barolo has the depth of flavor and strong tannin structure, which will pair really nicely with the rich and gamey flavor of the duck confit and the reduced stock sauce. And the notes of leather, truffle, and earth pair nicely with the sauteed mushrooms. And the relatively high acid content will add a needed brightness to the dish. I would also pair the Brunella di Montalcino, the 2016 vintage from Armia Toscano. This full-bodied and savory wine will pair nicely with the bold flavor of the duck confit and the earthiness of the mushrooms, and the pronounced tannins will cut through the creamy ricotta of the filling, while the acid will brighten up the savory pan sauce that accompanies the agnolotti. The next pasta dish we have is the fideos, which is a crab-based pasta which has a toasted angel hair spaghetti, and it also comes with pepper and chili flake, so it's got a little bit of heat. So for this, I would pair the Philippe Fontaine Blanc de Noir champagne from France. This dry champagne will allow the spice and flavor of the crab to shine through, and the refreshing notes of golden citrus and orchard fruits alongside the acidity of the wine will brighten up and match the acidity of the tomato-based sauce, and the minerality of the wine will pair really nicely with the toasted angel hair pasta. I would also go with Chardonnay, specifically the 2018 vintage from PA, which is located in the Sonoma coast of California. The light-bodied Chardonnay will allow the flavor of the crab and the spices to take center stage, while the buttery notes will produce a nice rounded-out taste with the savory crab. The acidity and the saline that comes through in the wine will provide a brightness to the dish, which can be needed with all the delicate flavors of the seafood. So the final pasta-based entree is the squid ink spaghetti, which is noodles that have been dyed black with squid ink, and it also features fresh shrimp and ground salami calabrese, which adds a little bit of heat alongside a jalapeno pesto. So with this heat content, I would go with a lighter bodied Pinot Grigio, specifically the Pinot Grigio Ramato from Antonucci Friuli. So the dry and fruity rosé will add nice complementary notes to the spice that comes from the jalapeno and the salami calabrese, and the fresh acidity of the wine will complement the fresh shrimp and brighten up the heavy spices and really cleanse the palate. I would also go with a Vermentino, specifically the 2020 Vermentino from Cantina Vecchiatura, which is from Puglia, Italy. So it's got a really light body and a mild sweetness, which will provide a nice contrast to the spiciness of the dish, and the citrus notes will help to highlight the flavor of the freshly sauteed shrimp and really bring the seafood to the forefront. So now we're into the meat-based entrees, beginning with the chicken parmigiana, and so this is going to feature a breaded and fried chicken cutlet, which is topped with tomato sauce, basil, and Parmesan cheese, which is all broiled together. And for this, since it's kind of hearty and a heavier dish, I would go with a Pinot Noir, specifically a Sass Pinot from the Willamette Valley, Oregon, which I have used previously. And the unfiltered Pinot will offer a nice acidity to the balance with the hearty tomato sauce that is baked with the chicken, and the light tannin structure will not stand in the way of the complexities of the tomato sauce or the meaty flavor of the chicken. And the citrus notes alongside the acidity will add a depth of flavor to the dish that can easily be muddled with the heavy fry on the chicken. Next, for a red option, I would go with the Barbera d'Alba, the 2017 vintage from Vara Barolo. The dark fruit notes of this medium-bodied wine will pair really nicely with the complexity of flavors resulting from the slow-cooked tomato sauce and the deeply fried coating on the chicken. And the acidity of this Italian red will pair nicely with the tomato sauce and help cut the richness of the Parmesan, which is featured on top of the chicken Parmesan. Next, we have the braised lamb shank, and this is a really hefty portion of lamb, which is topped with a pistachio mint pesto, and it also sits atop a bed of creamy polenta. So because of all the bold flavors, I would pair this with a more bold wine, specifically a Cabernet Sauvignon from the 2019 vintage from the Stag's Leap district of Napa Valley. So this full-bodied red wine will pair really nicely with a rich and heavy lamb shank, accompanied by the Sardinian spices and creamy polenta. So with the spice that comes from the wine, it'll pair really nicely with these warm spices of cinnamon and cardamom. And the medium tannin presence will pair nicely with the richness of the meat, and the fruity acidity will help to balance the richness of the meat as well as that of the creamy polenta. I would also go with a Nebbiolo, specifically the 2020 vintage from Cad El Bio, which is from Langhe, Italy. The high acid and tannin content of this wine creates a full-bodied red that will pair nicely with the hearty and rich lamb shank. The notes of strawberry and red fruits will add a needed freshness to the dish, while the earthy notes will meld with the earthiness of the Sardinian spices. So the next entree we have is the veal Milanese, which is going to be a fried veal cutlet, which is topped with pickled celery and a salad of shaved Brussels and some cabbage. So this is a dish that's famous in the Lombardy region, so grapes from this region, specifically the Barbera grape, would really complement the dish very well. So this is why I chose Barbera de Alba from the Vajra Barolo region. It's a 2017 vintage, and the dark fruit notes of the medium-bodied wine will pair nicely with the complexity of flavors resulting from the richness of the veal and the deeply fried coating. The acidity of the Italian red will be able to stand up to the acidity of the pickled celery, and it really helps to brighten up the earthiness of the cabbage as well as the Brussels sprouts. I would also go with a Pinot Noir, specifically the 2020 vintage from Orchard Lane, which is a New Zealand Pinot. The juicy red fruit notes presented in this Pinot Noir will bring some needed sweetness to the bitterness of the Brussels sprouts and pickled celery, while the smooth tannin structure will complement the rich nature of the veal. Okay, for the final entree, we have the grilled branzino, which is going to be a deboned and filleted Chilean sea bass, which is dusted in a little flour and pan fried. And it is also served with a really fresh rapini pesto and a cauliflower caponata, which is kind of like a salad. And for this, I would go with a Sancerre, specifically the Calcaire 2020, which is from Francois Le Saint France. So the dry, medium-bodied white wine will allow the delicate flavor of the sea bass to shine through, while providing enough acidity to balance out the fresh rapini pesto. And the notes of citrus and the minerality will complement the cauliflower caponata and bring added freshness to the dish. Next, I would go with the Rossi Pinot Nero, which is a 2019 from Mosca del Taco, which is also from Puglia, Italy. So this Pinot Noir-based rosé is dry and medium-bodied with notes of pear, apple, and lighter notes of red fruit. And the medium body of the wine will allow the delicate flavor of the sea bass to be emphasized, while the acidity of the wine will brighten up the pesto and the cauliflower-based relish.